Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but is probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Good day, everybody, and welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. My name is Susan Elliott, and I am the host of the podcast. And it's a Tuesday show, so today we're going to do a topic. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can write me at meanladytalkingpodcast@gmail.com. You could go to the Mean Lady Talking podcast page. You can go to the gettingpastyourbreakup.com page. There's a thing there that says, there's a page that has all of the podcasts listed. And you can write in there. You can tweet to me at Mean Podcast on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is regret. Regret is something that people feel when a relationship ends, when something happens that you don't know that you did the right thing at the time. They also call it shoulda, woulda, coulda. And when you live in the shoulda, woulda, coulda, you really narrow your life scope. And if you remember, one of the things that I talk about, and if you're new to the podcast, if you're new to the GPYB philosophy, you'll learn this soon. One of the things that GPYP and GPYB teaches is that when you resolve your unresolved grief and when you grieve any changes in your life as they happen, any losses in your life as they happen, you expand your life. And we talk about healthy relationships, and a healthy relationship is one which enlarges your life, not narrows it. And unresolved grief and regret and guilt, all of that stuff narrows your life scope. So you can't get into a healthy relationship because a healthy relationship is both a springboard to a happy life where you have hobbies, interests, and friends, and it's also a shelter in the storm. A healthy relationship enlarges your life. It's not just about you and the relationship. It's about you and the world. And the relationship is a very important part of that world, but it's still just part of the world. It's not your whole life. A healthy relationship would never be your whole life. So I'm going to talk about woulda, coulda, shoulda. I wrote an article on my blog. I usually publish it every February, and this year was a little late due to some things happening, but it's called Journey from Abuse. And it talks about me leaving my first marriage and what actually drove me to leave. And one of the things that drove me to leave was I had lost my job in January. I had had enough in September and I was going to leave then. But my husband talked me into not leaving because of the holidays. And we had always done a lot of holiday stuff together. We had always shopped for Christmas ornaments together. We always made a big deal out of the holidays. So he said to me, that was the thing that hooked me in. He said, "You're going to do this to the kids right before the holidays?" And I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, my youngest just turned 4. Or was going to turn 4. I couldn't deal with it. And I was very dysfunctional and I didn't really know. But in January, I lost my job. And every time I was out of work, he cheated on me. He became abusive. He did lots of things that he never did when I was working and had financial means. So he became very nasty toward me during the month of January. And I had decided that I had had enough of the few times, and I'm talking about going out on maternity leave. I still had a job to go back to. And as soon as I would go back to those jobs, he was nice as anything. When I wasn't working and I didn't have any financial means, he suddenly got very nasty. So I was poised for it in January. I knew it was coming. And he kept needling me and needling me and needling me. And I decided in my head, I'm not giving him the satisfaction of getting a rise out of me. And I remember I changed the wallpaper in the downstairs bathroom, and I knew nothing about wallpaper. I knew nothing about hanging wallpaper, but we both had always thought that the wallpaper in the bathroom that was off the kitchen was hideous. So I took it all down, and he saw that I had taken the other wallpaper down, and I was sanding the walls. I mean, I'm doing all this. Well, I have 3 kids to take care of, had to get 2 of them to school, had to look for a job, had to clean the house, had to cook, and now I'm doing wallpaper, which I'd never done before in my life. He was convinced that my mother, who wallpapered everything, was coming over during the day and helping me, and I kept saying, she's not. She's not coming over. But he was needling me, and I wasn't quite sure if he was needling me. If he was needling me because he really believed my mother was doing it, or he was just trying to make me crazy and get into a fight with me. And I was just refusing to play. I had been sucked in so many other times, and I wasn't in therapy yet, and I really didn't know the expression that my therapist gave me later on, the only way to win is not to play the game. I didn't know any of that yet, but I just didn't want to get into it with him. There was always craziness whenever I wasn't working. And it didn't matter why I went out of work. If I went out for maternity leave or, whatever, it's like, it didn't matter to him. So I was trying to ignore him. And if you read my story, The Journey of Abuse, he went and dragged the kids downstairs to pick up one Fisher-Price toy that was lodged in a couch. Couldn't even see it. The whole playroom was swept, vacuumed. Everything was away. Everything was dusted. And this is when you have 3 little kids. And he marched the 5-year-old and the 4-year-old down to pick up this one Fisher-Price toy. And then the next night, he went to do it again. And I realized that the abuse was now being targeted toward the kids to get a rise out of me. And usually when he came home, when he worked second shift, I would take the dog and put the dog in the yard. Max was a big red Doberman, and I talk about Max in the story Journey to Abuse. I just wanted to put Max in the yard in case my ex, ever got crazy with me. I didn't want Max to go after him. Well, this night I was so worried about the kids that I forgot about Max. And when he started up the stairs, and I made sure there was nothing in the playroom. I went through all the cushions. There was nothing. I'm convinced to this day that he planted that toy. And he was just going up to get the kids to get a rise out of me. And I ran up the stairs in front of him, and I threw myself in front of the boys' door. And I'm like, you're not marching those kids downstairs. And as I was doing that, he was pulling me off the door, and he was a lot bigger than me. He was 5'10.5". I'm 5'1". He was probably about 175, 180 pounds, and I was like 110. So it was quite a size difference. So he's pulling me off the door, and I've got my feet wedged on the bottom. I'm not taking them off. And as he's pulling me off, I realized Max was behind him. And Max is going after him. Max was a Doberman, but he was a one-person dog, and I was that person. So Max is going after him, and I'm trying to make sure that this ruckus is not waking up the boys. So he finally gets me away from the door. He pulls me, and he pulls me down the stairs. And as he pulled me down the stairs, I hung on to the banister. And I hung on and hung on and hung on until I couldn't hang on anymore because he was pulling at me. And I swung around, and my face hit the newel post. And I heard something in my face crack. And I looked because I was dazed. I saw stars. I was in a lot of pain. I mean, the pain shot right through my head. And later on, he would tell me that was my fault, that I shouldn't have hung on to the banister. Not that he shouldn't have pulled me off the banister, but that I shouldn't have hung on. I should just let him pull me down the stairs. So I was dazed, and I was standing there on the landing. I had no idea how to get to the boys. I thought he went back for the boys. And I looked up, and he had put his belt around Max's neck and was pulling him down the stairs with the belt. And I was trying to shake off the feeling that I had that I was just dazed, and I was running after him. And when we got to the bottom of the stairs, I grabbed the arm that had Max. He had Max like off the floor with his belt. And Max weighed like 80 pounds. He was a big dog. And I was like, oh my God, he's killing him. And so he dropped Max when I went after his arm. I like hung on his arm with all of my might. And he dropped the belt. And Max ran into the corner, and then I ran in front of him to keep him from getting to him. And then he was so angry at me because I wouldn't let him get to Max. Poor Max was just shaking, that he stormed out. Well, we went through a lot. Me, the boys, Max, we went through a lot. But that was when I made the decision to leave. When the abuse was coming down to my kids and my dog to get a rise out of me, and that got a rise out of me. All of that got a rise out of me. And I realized that there was just no stopping him. Like, he would just keep doing things like this. He was going to kill my dog and probably injure my children. So I had to leave, and I left very shortly afterwards. I had his stuff packed that night, but he kept coming in the house at all hours of the day and night, so I left. I left with the boys, and then I went back for Max. So then we had a house that I rented, and then it was a house that I bought. So this was over a period of a couple of years. And I finally had a house that had this nice, beautiful backyard. It was 2 acres of rolling grass. And I had a boyfriend who was really good with animals. He had never had a dog before. His mother said that he was afraid of dogs. She was one of these enmeshing parents who didn't want the child to show any affection to anything else. And when they were thinking about getting a dog, he was so excited and he was going to show this dog affection, and she just went crazy. And so she got rid of the dog. She said that she had hives because of the dog. And he was always afraid of dogs because she told him from an early age that he was afraid of dogs. So I show up with an 80-pound red Doberman. Well, he loved that dog, And my boyfriend was like 6'1". He had these long legs, and he would run the length of the yard, and Max would run with him, and he would call him Bounding Oove. So he'd be running with the dog, and I would think, you know what? Max really deserves to have a place like this. You know, it's like we've been through a lot. All of us have been through a lot. It was a nice house. Everything was fine. Everything was lovely after a few years of turmoil. I would sit at the dining room table and I'd look out at the yard and I'd see my boyfriend and my dog running on the lawn. And this is the way that it should be. This is so peaceful and so nice. And I'm standing there about 2 years into this, we're living in this house, and I'm in the dining room and I look at Max one day and he had a lump on his leg. And I was like, oh my God. And I took him to the vet and it turned out that he had bone cancer. And I was devastated. He was 6 years old. And I had had a Doberman for a short time before him. There's a whole other story of me and my ex. We bought a 3-family house, and the people there thought that we wouldn't come into their apartment, and they left their red Doberman in there, and we kicked down the door and took the dog. And she was 13. So I had expected that Max would live to at least 10. That was pretty average age for a dog. And he was 6, not yet 7. And he was a rescue. So I wasn't quite sure of his age, but when I got him, he was still a puppy. And I'd had him about 6 years. So he was still a puppy when I got him. I was flipping out. So they took me to Tufts Veterinary School, which is one of the top veterinary schools in the country. And a woman that I worked with actually had her dog had gone through an amputation of the leg that had the bone cancer, and then she went through chemo and radiation. And I watched all these films and all these dogs, and I was so devastated at the thought of losing Max, and that he needed to live longer and have a better life. Like, I wanted him to have a better life for more years than he had a bad life. So I talked to the vet. The vet was wonderful. Everybody at the hospital was wonderful. It was going to cost me a few $1,000s, but they were helping me with the bill. We went through, and Max had the amputation, and everybody told me that dogs get used to the amputation very quickly. But he didn't seem to be getting used to it very quickly. He got stuck in the couch one day, and I had to pull him out, and he had the bandages still on and everything. And I had to pull him out, and I sat and cried. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm so sorry. Like, I couldn't explain to him why I had his leg amputated. So then I brought him for chemo, and as soon as I got him home, I just knew that something was wrong. And the vet told me that I could expect if he didn't get any treatment, that he would die within a year, probably more like 6 months. So he told me if you do nothing, you're going to have him for another 6 months to a year. If you go through this treatment, the average dog lives 3 more years. He had gone through all the tests, but something was wrong. Something was really wrong. So I took him back to the vet, and the vet said his kidneys are shutting down. There was an undetected kidney problem, and when the first treatment of chemo was given, it just destroyed his kidneys. So they kept him overnight to see if there was something they could do for him. Called me in the morning and he said, he's not going to make it. And he said, I think that it's time to put him down. And I said, well, wait for me to get there. And he's like, you're coming here? And I was like, yes, of course. I'm not letting my dog die alone. So I went there and they had Max in a little room. You know, all the dogs had their own little room. And he was laying on a little blanket and little dog bed. And when he saw me, his little tail wagged. And I sat down with him. And my boyfriend was there. And the vet was there. And I stayed with him for about 15 minutes, just stroking his head. And then I said, it's okay. You can come in. And he had his head on my lap. And the vet put him to sleep. And this is, I think this is 94 that this happened. And it's 2018. So it's almost 25 years later. You could probably imagine what I was like on that day. I just felt like he was always there for me. And I had done something terrible to him. Instead of having him for 6 months to a year, I had him for 2 weeks after the bone cancer was discovered. And I felt like I failed him in every single way. And it was my responsibility. You take a rescue dog, it's your responsibility to make sure that dog lives a good life. And I felt I had exposed him to an abuser, although I got out. But things were rough when we first got out. All of us had it rough. We didn't have it really good until we moved into that house. We moved into that house like 92, and Max died in 94. And I felt like he didn't have enough of a good life. And I felt like it was my fault. At the same time, right before this had happened, my mother had passed away from breast cancer. And I remember the last day that I was in her room. She had said that she didn't want to telephone. I was calling and calling. I couldn't understand. And I guess people that are dying, that know they're dying, just disconnect from the world. And she had told the hospital she didn't want a telephone. And I was stomping up to the hospital to convince her that she needed to have a telephone and let's stop this craziness. And I brought the kids with her. It was my son Michael's birthday. So my mother they had her in a bed in the hallway waiting for her to get into a room. And I marched up to her, and she was always real big on giving the kids a lot of stuff for their birthdays and stuff like that. And I said, it's Michael's birthday. And she just looked at him. She said, happy birthday, Michael. He was 10. I mean, he was like, he didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything about grief at the time, and I was furious with her for doing this whole disconnection thing. You're going to get well, and you're going to stop this. Get into the room. My boyfriend came, and then he took the kids home. And then he brought the kids back because it seemed like she wasn't going to make it. But right before she passed away, about an hour before she passed away, the nurse came in and gave her a shot of morphine. And I asked the nurse, I was like, what are you doing? And she said, I'm giving her morphine so she can be comfortable. And I was convinced that morphine killed her. That's what I was convinced. The woman was riddled with cancer. And I was convinced that the morphine killed her and that it was my fault because I didn't stop the nurse. I mean, I don't know what I was going to do. Tackle the nurse in the hospital room? Shoulda, woulda, coulda. I remember that when my adoptive mother was sick, I had started searching for my birth mother because I was looking for my brother who I remembered. And my adoptive mother had some issues with me searching for my birth family. So when she got sick, I stopped because I didn't want to upset her when she was sick. And then I found out when I talked to my birth mother the first time that Edward had passed away. And if I had been able to continue my search before my mother got sick, I would have been able to meet him and see him. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. I was so upset over these three things that I was unable to function. First, there was Edward. Then there was my adoptive mother. And then there was Max. And I fell apart after Max. I absolutely fell apart. And most of you know the story about my first therapist and how tough she was with me. And I wasn't seeing her at this point, but somebody sent me to a grief therapist. They said, this guy is terrific. And he was a 12-stepper, and I had heard him speak, and he was really funny. So I went to see him, and I told him all the things that I just told you. And he told me that he always teased his wife about being a hypochondriac. He said they had a house on Cape Cod, and he said when they would go in the water, she would go up to her knees. The water would go up to her knees, and she would not be able to feel her legs. And she would swear that she had multiple sclerosis or something, or muscular dystrophy. And she'd be screaming that she was having a stroke. He said that was how she responded to everything. If it was, the water wasn't just cold and numbed her legs. No, she's dying of a muscular disease now. And he said she was like that with everything. If she had a headache, it was a brain tumor. If she had a cold, it was pneumonia. She was going to die. Everything, she was going to die. And he said that one night she was complaining about pains in her back, and she thought that she was having a heart attack. And he said he did the Fred Sanford of Sanford and Son imitation. I'm coming, Elizabeth, I'm coming, grabbing his chest, going, I'm coming, Elizabeth, I'm coming. And he said he used to tease her all the time that she was Fred Sanford of Sanford and Son. And he said to her, how are you having a heart attack when the pain's in your back? Oh, you just want to say it's a heart attack, so I'll do my Fred Sanford impression. And then he would do it. But she wasn't going to sleep. She was really upset. And over the years, and they had teenage children, teenage girls. And he said over the years, she had always been a hypochondriac, and he had always done the Fred Sanford impression. But he said it was just about dawn when she was absolutely positively serious. She had to go to the hospital. And he said he was even teasing her on the way to the hospital that this is going to be a waste of time, going to go back home, etc. She was in her early 40s, and she had never been anything but in the best of health. So he thought that this was the silliest thing, going to the hospital, especially since the pain was in her back. He thought that maybe she wrenched it or something. He said, you probably pulled a muscle. He said it to her all the way to the hospital. He said, in the hospital. And he kept asking her if she had pains in her chest, pains in her arms. She kept saying, no. I had pains in my back. I know it's my heart. He said, you know that nobody has a heart attack with pains in their back. Anyway, they get to the hospital, and they put her on machines. And she is in a full-blown cardiac arrest. And she died a few hours later. And when he told me this story, my mouth dropped open. And he was sitting there. Now, he's going to be my therapist. And this is one of the things I always tell people. I share my stories with my clients. I had 2 excellent therapists who shared their stories with me. And this was a story that I will never, ever, ever forget. Never. And I was with him for 2 years. He was an excellent therapist, and he shared all kinds of things with me. But I would tell him something that happened in my life, and then he would tell me something that happened in his that was similar. And he was always on the money. And that's what my first therapist did, and that's what I do. So people always say, like, I talk about myself a lot, that my book, Getting Past Your Breakup, has a lot of me in it. Getting Back Out There has a lot of me in it. It's like, sorry, that's the kind of help I received, and that's the kind of help I give. If you want a Freudian who sits behind a desk, doesn't wear a wedding ring, doesn't have pictures of their family in their office, all that sort of stuff, go to a Freudian. Don't go to me, because I'm going to share stuff about my life. So he shared this with me, and he said that he beat himself up for months and months Even though the doctors told him that getting her to the hospital any earlier would not have saved her, he hated himself for every time he teased her about her hypochondria. He hated himself for the hard time he gave her that day at the ocean when she swore that she had some muscular disease because her legs went cold in the ocean. He hated himself for joking with her the night that she died. He relived it all the time. He said constantly, it was constantly on his mind. And he was telling me this because I was saying the same thing about my brother and my mother and my dog. All these things were in my head all the time. The day that Max got stuck in the couch because he only had 3 legs. And he looked so sad. I talked about him bounding joy across the lawn. The look on his face, like he could have been in a dog food commercial. It was just, he was the picture of a joyous dog, bounding across that lawn. And I thought about him bounding across that lawn and then what he looked like when he got stuck in that couch. It's 2 different dogs. He was so sad. I said, if only I had told the nurse not to give my mother morphine. If only I had not insisted on medical treatment for my dog. If only I had continued to search for my brother, even though my adoptive mother was sick, and searching for my biological family upset her. So when he told me this story, I was, I feel the same way. So I thought we were just going to commiserate. But then he said to me, and I talked in podcast number 1 about why this is called Mean Lady Talking, that I had a lot of people who shot straight from the hip and gave me tough love. But this man was not one of them. He was one of the softies. And I talk about balance. In Getting Past Your Breakup, Getting Past Your Past, I talk a lot about balance. And when I had mentors, I tried to balance some of the real tough ones with some of the real huggy ones. And he was one of the huggies. But I thought I just met him and I told him the whole thing about the hospital and the morphine and my dog and the amputation and my brother. So I thought we were just going to commiserate. And then he told me that someone told him that living in the guilt, living in the shoulda, coulda, woulda is a form of denial. It gives you the illusion of control over something you had absolutely no control over. It allows you to ruminate about something that doesn't matter. Even if all those things were true, even if he could have saved her getting to the hospital, even if I could have talked that nurse into not giving my mother morphine, even if I didn't have my dog's leg amputated, the results would be the same. They would still all be dead. Living in the shoulda, woulda, coulda gives you a sense of control, a sense of I could do something about this. Even if you did what you think you shoulda, woulda, coulda, it doesn't change the outcome. The people and the dog are still dead. And it doesn't change the circumstances that you need to accept today. Say, if only I had told that nurse, don't give my mother morphine. Do you think she would have listened to me? If only I had not insisted on medical treatment for my dog. Well, this was well past the 6 months to a year that he would have had to live if I didn't give him any medical. He still would have been dead. He had bone cancer. There was only so much I could do for him, but he was never getting to 10, which was my wish for him. And he was certainly not getting to 13. All those if-onlys and shoulda, woulda, coulda did not change the fact that my mother was dead, my dog was dead, and my brother was dead. And living in the shoulda done, coulda done, woulda done, if only, was keeping me from accepting the loss, grieving the loss, and moving on. It gave me the illusion of control where I actually had absolutely none. Even if what I had done was horrible and the absolute wrong thing, it didn't change a thing. My mother was dead, my dog was dead, and my brother was dead. And that was the reality I needed to worry about. Those were the losses I needed to grieve because I had sustained those losses, and whether or not I was at fault for those losses didn't change the fact that they happened. They occurred, and I lost. And I needed to mend from those losses no matter who was at fault. And as convinced as I was that the if-onlys would have saved whomever, there is no guarantee of that. I could have insisted that the nurse not give my mother morphine, and not only would my mother have still died, but she would have died in excruciating pain. I could have insisted that my dog not get medical treatment, and he may have died a slower, more lingering death. I wouldn't have known the compassionate vet who put him to sleep because I met him through the bone cancer program at Tufts. So I don't know what the alternative would have been to that. I did not have a compassionate vet. I had a guy that he went to once a year for heartworm medicine and rabies shots. And I thought about his regular vet, and I thought, he was a compassionate vet, but he wasn't all touchy-feely like the vet at Tufts was. And I could have looked for my brother earlier, and perhaps my appearance would have driven him away and then given me something different to regret when he ultimately died. I would have been the cause of that. And I still sometimes can play with, he knew about me, he knew I was out there, and maybe he became a drug addict, and maybe he didn't keep himself in the best shape. Well, he was in good shape, but he was smoking, and he was asthmatic, and he was drinking, and all these sort of perfect storm things happened to contribute to his death. But maybe he was stressed out about me. I don't know. I convinced myself for a long time that he was. In my all-powerful, omnipotent mind, I could change the past by doing X, Y, or Z. In my fantasy, shoulda, coulda, woulda, the thing I should have done was the correct thing and would have saved everyone. Everyone would have been saved. Everybody would have been alive. I'm so powerful. But that's not how it goes. This man, who was my therapist for 2 years after he told me the story about his wife, told me, first of all, we don't know that what we shoulda, coulda, woulda would have changed a damn thing. We like to think that we could have changed this outcome because we don't like the outcome and we don't like being so powerless over the outcome. We want to think we could change something, but the reality is what you have to accept. The person is gone, whether they're gone through death or they're gone because they walked out the door or they're gone because you sent them out the door. The reality is that the relationship is no more. And thinking about what you could have done to change it doesn't change it now. We are thinking, if only I had done this, it would be different, because we want to think that we had some control over a situation we had no control over. And that lack of control made us feel powerless, and that powerlessness drove us to the shoulda, woulda, couldas, because we don't want to accept the powerlessness. But even if we could change it, even if we could have changed it, we can't change it now. Thinking back on what we could have done can serve as a lesson for the future, but that's it. That's the only thing you could do. If you have regrets, if you have guilt about something, the only thing, and I teach this all the time, the only thing that guilt is good for is to instruct future behavior. Forget about the past. You cannot change the past. The only thing you can do about the past is accept it. And if you want whatever it is you're feeling guilty about, whatever it is you regret, if you want that to have some meaning and not just be a waste of your energy and a waste of your consciousness, you have to take the lesson from not acting in the past and apply it to see where you can act in the future. Other than a lesson for the future, living in the if-onlys does not serve us at all. Not at all. Let it go. It's only good to use as a lesson for the future, if you could. When my husband, Michael, was sick and dying, and I knew he was dying, I was giving him morphine. Because by that time I learned he's going to die anyway, and I don't want him to die in pain. And I learned that lesson from thinking back about my mother. Of course the nurse should have given her that morphine. Absolutely. When Michael was dying, I gave him the morphine. I was not going to withhold the morphine because it's going to kill him. The morphine didn't kill him. The cancer killed him. And the cancer killed my mother, not the morphine, not the nurse. You have to let go of the shoulda, woulda, coulda mindset. You have no idea if you could have saved that which was not saved. You cannot rewrite the past, so stop living there. And in any event, it wasn't saved. That's the reality. It's gone. And that's what you need to know, and that's what you need to accept. Even if you could have changed things then, you can't change them now, and now is what matters. It's the only thing that matters. Living in the could have dones gets you nowhere and gains you nothing. Live where you can change things, the present and the future. Take what you need from the lesson of the past and then face forward. Stop shooting on yourself and change the things you can change today. And the only thing you can change is you. And not the you that you used to be, but the you that you are now. If you have regret and guilt about the past, it's time to face forward. It's time to heal. It's time to move on. There's a serenity prayer that goes, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Find the wisdom to know the difference of what you can and cannot change. You cannot change the past. Accept what you can't and change what you can. The only thing you can change is you. Let go the guilt, let go the regret, face forward and live your life. You can do this. I hope that today's podcast gave you something to think about, because guilt and regret are really horrible things to live with, especially when there's absolutely nothing you can do about what happened. If you had something go on in the past that you truly feel you could have changed, accept that you didn't change it then, and accept that you're just going to learn from it now and you're going to move on. And that's part of being good to you. So be good to you and know that you can do it. Leave the past in the past, face forward, and work on you. You can do this. This is Susan Elliott signing off. Have a great, guilt-free day. Talk to you soon.